let's talk about receiving feedback. Because again, even if you're a manager, you're likely getting a review from your own boss. So now the shoe's on the other foot, literally. Or as I say, flip the script. And that's rule 1. When you're receiving feedback, make sure that you're giving the same effort that you'd expect employees on the other side. So putting yourself in their shoes. As you look through your performance review, as you hear the words that your boss is telling you, thinking about what are they trying to say. Step 2 is to listen. And as hard as that may be, because at times, just like you're going through these lessons and trying to be deliberate about your people leadership, your boss might not. But it's important to listen to what they have to say first by looking and actively listening, meaning that your mouth's not like, but, and that you're truly listening to what they have to say and reading the words on the page. The third step is to ask questions to make sure that you understand specifics. And so, just like I said, one of the biggest gaps I've seen in performance reviews is when the review has really generality terms, is to ask, can you give me examples of this? And if your manager says, oh, there's plenty of times, go back and look in your emails, saying, absolutely, but I want to make sure that I'm clear because I want to perform and understand some of the areas I could have specifically done better that matter most to you and to the organization. But it's asking those questions just like you'd want an employee to do to you so that you can understand any of the areas where what you did didn't align with what your manager expected. Another is to write down notes. At times, you might not be in the mindset, and you may need to collect yourself to think about some of the topics that are gone over in your performance review. Again, that can be critical or positive feedback. If you're getting one of those general reviews, it's like, you had a great year, here's your compensation, that's not really helpful. But to say, I'd love to know some of the areas that you felt like really mattered most as you reflect over the last year so that I can make sure that those are areas I'm focusing on in the next year. I'm happy to be told I did a good job, but I want to make sure that I'm specifically doing the right job in the next review period and ongoing. Things like that can be helpful to ensure it is more of a communication and open up your boss if they're not as deliberate about their people leadership as you are. But again, taking notes, whether there's things that are said that you don't feel like you can ask in the moment, or as you look at your review, going and looking after the fact so that you can follow up and ask questions about it to make sure that if this document captures a year in your life, that you're making sure you will know all of the steps to move forward in the next year at that job. Another step in receiving feedback is to revisit the conversation. Just like I said in giving feedback, that it shouldn't be one and done. You shouldn't just take the feedback and move on, but using any notes you have so that in that next one-on-one, you can use the time to ask questions to your boss to make sure that you're understanding exactly those areas and keeping track on them. If there are new goals that were added in your review over the next year, adding those to your one-on-one agenda so that you can keep track, make sure that those are still the goals to focus on and revisiting those. And if there is critical feedback, talking about opportunities with your boss. One thing that can be really hard is if you get critical feedback, an instinct may be to constantly follow up. Every time you have something saying, do you want me to send you a draft every time or an email every time? Your boss, just like you might feel the same way, doesn't want to get a million pings. And that's probably not the best way to build that relationship. But by having time in that one-on-one where you can say, okay, so if I'm working on my communication, can I print out a few examples and talk through with you and have you look over them to give me feedback and I'll take it in. And in those one-on-ones, just like in your performance review, listening to that feedback because no matter how you feel like you've done in your work, it is important to hear what others say, especially if you want to stay at that organization. Ultimately, as you receive feedback, it's important to reflect on it because it is your career. Thinking about what are some of the highlights, what are some of the things I did well, and thinking to yourself, what are the other things that I think I did well personally, even if my boss didn't call attention to those? And those are some things you can raise in the one-on-one to say, these are some of the areas I worked on. Are those important to the organization moving forward? So that you can make sure that the things that you enjoy the most, that you spend the time on the most, are the ones that really matter to the organization. Because likely your boss and all the others that they work with are going to have different priorities next year than they had the prior year. Others are to think about it. Sometimes you might get a review and you think, this doesn't capture this year at all, or I feel like I worked so hard for nothing. Especially right now, as organizations have gone from the Great Resignation and hiring sprees to now all of a sudden flipping the script and budgets are cut and there's layoffs, it may feel really challenging if you feel like you're working harder than ever for nothing. But some is to think about it. Economies are temporary, so just because you didn't get a raise this year doesn't mean that that's a reflection on your performance. It doesn't feel great, trust me. But a lot of organizations right now are scrambling and trying to think about what they can do to retain employees when their revenues are cut so they just don't have as many dollars to dole out. So it may mean an opportunity where you're thinking, I have to go external. but understanding a lot of organizations right now are having the same type of challenges. And so the grass may not always be greener on the other side. So talking to your boss as candidly as you can, especially to say, I feel like I'm working more than ever. Am I spending my time in the right ways? Because I don't want to burn out if I'm not working on things that matter. Or to say to your boss, what are the most important areas that I can focus on that truly will make a difference? Because right now, I know that greater times are ahead, but we have to make them greater. So having that conversation to make sure that you know what matters, what you can do to drive revenue if you're in that opportunity, or facilitate that revenue if you're more on the back end, but things that you can do right now. But again, knowing whatever you have to decide to do, it's your career. The final step, and this is whether you're giving or receiving feedback, is to have your truth tellers, the people that you can talk to. If you're receiving feedback, your boss is going to tell you things, but it can be important to have people at work that you work with, that see you, that know you, that can lift you up when it matters, but also talk to you and can tell you honestly, like, oh, hey, you might want to try this, but to give each other that feedback. It can be hard to figure out who those people are, but over time, figuring out who your colleagues are at work that you can talk about that can help you develop over time, and not just be the person that you complain to when you have a bad day, but the people that actually help you develop. As a manager, it's really important to have other managers you talk with. And I don't mean talking very specifically about employees, because with employees, private performance, it's not good to always share specifics, and often it may not be appropriate. But talking to other managers about how do you have this type of conversation, or have you ever encountered this? Your HR may facilitate manager cohorts like that. I work with those in Manager 101 boot camps after managers have gone through it. I think it's really important for managers to have open forums. But no matter what your role is, having the people that you can talk to, not just to be your friend, to go out and blow off steam, but those people that can help you to develop and help you in that role as you move on in the organization and in your career.